extreme. Now, they did have one good rule here. Now, if you killed them, you had to bury them. The ground around here is extremely rocky, so it did keep the indiscriminate killings down to a minimum. Now, we're here in the dining room of the Grant House stage station, and when you look around the surrounding area of the town site, you'll notice that there is a lack of trees tall enough from which to hang somebody from. So, and when somebody did deserve to be hanged, it was usually here in the dining room of the Grant House. On this beam, we don't know exactly how many folks were hung over the years, but we do know who the last two guests of honor were. It's in 1882, and the guests of honor were Sandy King and Russian Bill. Now, Russian Bill, he dabbled in mining claims, buying, trading, and selling. He was elected the claims recorder for the Stonewall Mining District, about 50 miles south of here. And by the records, they found that he did swindle two men out of a $10,000 mining claim. Back in those days, in a mining community like this, that was enough to get you hanged. Now, Sandy King, well, he was one of those Texas cowboys that was hired as an enforcer for the company during that first boom. And he never did any one thing bad enough to warrant getting hanged. He was a bully, he picked fights, he sat there and did a little thieving on the side. It was only an accumulation of things that finally got him hanged. The straw that broke the camel's back was that morning he decided he needed to buy a silk hanky there to General Merchandise here in town. The clerk thought it was highly amusing that here's rough, tough Sandy King went to buy a silk hanky on credit at that. So he showed his amusement, and he said he didn't take kindly to being laughed at. To show that that's what was he thought about this clerk laughing at him, he grabbed the clerk by the wrist, pulled out his pistol, and boom, blew his finger off. Well, the clerk was well liked here in Shakespeare, and they figured since they're already going to hang Sandy, Russian Bill, they're going to go ahead and do Sandy. That way they only have to dig one hole. Well, unfortunately, the two men found out what was coming down. They jumped onto two horses that did not belong to them and proceeded to ride out of town. Well, somebody got a shot off and knocked Sandy out of the saddle, nothing major, just a flesh wound. They locked him up in a building while two men went after Russian Bill. Well, they found him down in the dining, asleep in an old boxcar. They brought him back here to Lordsburg, bought him a good meal, and later that night brought him up here to Shakespeare. Well, they threw ropes over the beam, sit there, pulled them up, tied them off, and when they quit kicking, everybody went home to their own beds. Well, next morning when the stage arrived, instead of their breakfast, the passengers found two dead men hanging from the beam here. They had to cut them down, lay them outside beside the door so they could actually get their breakfast. And once breakfast was done, they said, and the stage took off, they buried the bodies in a common grave at the Shakespeare Cemetery. Well, the folks here at Shakespeare figured that was the end of the story. But no. A few months later, here's a letter from the Russian consulate from a Mrs. Tuttenborn, who was writing to ask if anybody knew anything about the whereabouts of the well-being of her son, William. He'd been receiving his letters here at Shakespeare for the past 2 years and had stopped answering them. Well, postmaster and folks scratched their heads and were trying to figure out what they're going to say to the poor lady. They didn't want to lie to her, but they didn't want to hurt her feelings by saying, hey, we hanged your son. So the response back was probably the best piece of Old West understatement I've ever come across. The response said, "Dear madam, we regret to inform you your son has died of throat trouble." Not exactly a lie, just not the whole truth. But that was the last hanging here at Shakespeare.